So much for appeasement. The same Europeans who held their nose and swallowed their pride when the EU agreed to Donald Trump's tariffs last summer can no longer ignore the obvious that there are limits with a president of the United States who it tends to treat them as vassals, not allies, even as adversaries at times, for pushing back on the Trump administration's white nationalist brand of nativism. We'll ask how much pain citizens in Europe are willing to bear in the name of safeguarding the continent's security and sovereignty, and how far countermeasures can go as in the face of Trump's grab for Greenland, the tariff slapped on Denmark's allies, an official policy that views liberal values as a threat. And then, of course, there is Ukraine, where a lot of carefully diplos speak from European capitals this past year has been about keeping the U.S. president on board. From Greenland to the Baltics, is Europe ready for what lies next? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking if it's the end of appeasement. With us from Strasbourg, he's a former Italian European Affairs Minister, and he's now a French member of the European Parliament, Sandro Gozzi of the centrist Renew Group. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hello. Thanks for inviting me.
Giovanna Di Maio is professor of U.S. foreign policy at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po's Paris School of International Affairs. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
From Washington, Peter Doran, adjunct senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy's think tank. Welcome back to the show.
Great to be back.
And welcome back as well from Vienna, Gustav Gressel, senior researcher and lecturer at the Austrian Armed Forces National Defense Academy. How are you?
Good evening.
You cannot. That's a heavy good evening. You can always listen, like, and subscribe to the France 24 debate wherever podcasts are streamed. Yeah, maybe Venezuela's Maria Corina Machado giving her Nobel Peace Prize to Donald Trump just wasn't enough. The U.S. president responding to a text message in support of Denmark by Norway's prime minister by telling Jonas Gahr Støre, "Dear Jonas, considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace." And the Norwegian prime minister had this reaction.
I'm not going to comment on every sentence in that text message. He's very preoccupied with the Nobel Peace Prize. And I've explained to him many times that it's an award given by a Norwegian committee, not by the Norwegian government. I'm happy to repeat that. But I do believe, I've always thought that if leaders are very focused on the Peace Prize, that's not a bad thing. It means they're interested in doing something that qualifies them for an award that's about peace.
So even there, Peter Doran, he seems to be trying to give Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt. Is that really what this is all about? That he's angry because he didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, I think that example was a masterclass in diplomatic language, and kudos to the Norwegian government for interpreting it, Trump's letter as such. Look, here's the deal. We talk about appeasing President Trump, but let's think about this. How long have Europeans and Americans complained to each other that we think in short-term timelines? Meanwhile, China is always operating on a 100-year strategy. What we're seeing with this Greenland gambit is that President Trump is thinking very long term. 100 years from now, Greenland is going to be some of the most valuable real estate on the planet. And we don't know how powerful China will be. We don't know if there will be a NATO left. But what President Trump is trying to assert is that it is better to have Greenland under America's full control and protection rather than without.
Sandro Gozzi, is that what this is all about?
I think that Donald Trump's show continues and is not fun at all. And I don't think it is long-term vision. It's just a will of bullying American allies. It's just a will of marking territory because there is no economic, neither economic nor security reasons for Trump to threaten Greenland. The Americans could strengthen their military presence, could strengthen their security presence. They could use the bilateral treaty with Denmark of 1951, just a way of bullying and marking territory. But it is clear, going back to the title of the show, that this must be the end of appeasement. And I think that the first to stop the appeasement strategy should be the European Union.
Yeah, we'll talk more about the reactions of those Europeans. Just one more item in all of this. It was a behind-the-scenes moment captured for a documentary by partner station France 2. And in it, the Nobel Peace Prize comes up in conversation when France's president calls his U.S. counterpart about Ukraine.
Donald, I know it's very early in the morning for you. I'm sorry to call at that time. May I call you in 2 minutes with Zelensky, Starmer, and Merz? It's okay for you?
Yeah, go ahead. What's going on?
Because he accepted what you proposed on your message, meaning a ceasefire for 30 days and so on. So he's ready to announce it.
Did Putin accept also?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Nobel Prize for this.
Again, Gustav Gressel, is Donald Trump thinking 100 years ahead, or is he just thinking about getting an award for himself?
Well, I think it's neither about the Nobel Peace Prize nor about 100 years ahead thinking. It's probably not even a week ahead thinking. He's basically, he proposed to make America great again, and he thinks about that literally. So he mocks other presidents, especially those in the later 20th century, that they have ruined the United States, that the United States was better off before the First World War in the Western Hemisphere, and then it got larger by purchases. He's obsessed about his place in history. And of course, Greenland, just by square miles, would be the largest purchase, regardless what he would ruin with that, and ruining an alliance, driving dozens of countries into Chinese and Russian hands. He's okay with that. He can't think a moment ahead. And that is probably at the end what he will accomplish with this stunt.
And again, just to be clear, if Giovanni Di Maio, you look at the events of the last week, how do you make sense of it? Why it's coming to a head now?
It's not new. Trump has expressed interest in Greenland already during his first term. Has voiced the possibility of buying the land. But what we see now is a clear attempt to make history, especially ahead of 250th anniversary of the United States coming up in the summer, in which his personal grandeur can have some sort of echo in the U.S., given that perhaps this purchase or this acquiring Greenland can be also making its place in history. During his inauguration speech, he mentioned President McKinley, who in 1898, after the Spanish-American War, acquired a lot of territories, including Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. So probably he also wants to be one of these in his legacy. At the same time, I wouldn't really say that this qualifies as peace prize, because you see that American allies such as France, Denmark, and other countries in Europe have participated to the Arctic endurance exercise, sending troops for training in Greenland. So if he really wanted to achieve peace, prosperity, security, he would have had plenty of other options, and instead it chose to escalate through this narrative and through the threat of tariffs.
Yeah, there was this symbolic show of force last week that was done by the European nations, 8 of them sending military officers to Greenland for an exercise led by the Danes. We can perhaps show you Germany's 15-person contribution, a performative display that the leader of Germany's far right has labeled there you see them getting off the plane, dismissed it as plane hopping. But Alice Weidel also distancing herself from Trump this time, saying he has, quote, violated a fundamental election promise, namely not to interfere in other countries, and he has to explain that to his own voters. Peter Doran, how does he explain that to his own voters?
Well, for one, Francois, he points out that our German allies had to fly on a rented Boeing 737. They didn't even fly a commercial Airbus. They didn't fly a military aircraft. Usually when NATO must deploy, it needs to rely on America's global lift capacity to get their troops from one part of the world to the other. This underscores the fundamental weakness that I think this Greenland debate has revealed. That is that Europe is not yet ready to defend itself, let alone a exposed territory like Greenland. Meanwhile, President Trump is making the case in national security terms. This is where I think he fails. He has not yet explained to the American public that there are trillions of dollars in resources here at stake in Greenland. Those are resources that could never be developed under the European Union because the EU's regulations are just too strict. Meanwhile, let's look ahead again.
For years, Denmark tried to get outside players to come in, and it just never seems to work.
Under EU laws, under EU regulations. Under the United States, we have the potential to develop these resources, not valuable minerals, the things that make modern life possible for all of us. And we have the question, do we want the United States or a global competitor like China to horn in on that? That's the future that President Trump is forcing both sides of the Atlantic to comprehend.
Let me ask you, Sandro Gozzi, your thoughts. Can the U.S. do stuff that the Europeans cannot?
What I heard is just nonsense. It's really nonsense what I've just heard. I mean, to say, well, you know, the EU regulation is too difficult. We got simple regulation. Let's invade a territory linked to the European Union, to Denmark, because in the United States we got better regulation. This is nonsense, but this is going to go against the own interest of the United States of America, because we want to remain passive, because we will do everything we can to go back, to push back to reason, Washington and Donald Trump. But if the reason doesn't come back, we will take our countermeasure, even on security issues, because it is true that the power of America is totally asymmetric when it comes to security, whereas we have more power when it comes to trade, to digital legislation. But at the end of the day, there are bases of the United States of America in Europe. The United States of America still need their military bases in Europe. So I think that we should all go back to reason and stop this flexing of muscles, which really, I repeat, is nonsense. And China. Of course, China is a major danger and a major threat for both of us. But do the Trump administration think that the best way to stop China is to do everything it can to put the Europeans towards the arms of China? It wouldn't be better that we sit around the table together within the NATO framework, within the transatlantic dialogue, in good faith dialogue between allies, and to see how we can counteract the Chinese strategy and also the Russian strategy in the Arctic Circle. This really, I mean, it doesn't make sense, this strategy, and it is something that can seem to be a big show in the short run, but it could be very harmful for both of us in the longer run.
Gustav Gressel, in the last minutes, we've had Finland's prime minister saying he doesn't think that the United States is going to try to take Greenland by force. He doesn't think, but he doesn't rule it out either, does he?
Well, we don't know what Donald Trump's going to do. It might be possible that he uses military force, But just, to get some things straight, in Greenland in 1985, there was a referenda on whether Greenland is part of the EU internal market or not, and it ruled out that it would be part. So they signed out. It was, of course, a fight about fishing quota at the time. But Greenland is not, since 1985, under EU's jurisdiction. The same, we have a 1951 treaty, the US-Greenland Defense Treaty, under which the United States is actually allowed to have and maintain military bases far beyond what it currently had. They had 17 bases during the Cold War. They had even more during the Second World War, when the US government and the British government, together with the Danish government in exile, actually behaved much more constructive towards Denmark than Donald Trump does. So there is no security reason. This is trumped up nonsense that reminds me of discussing with Russian participants about the Crimea annexation. If the United States were concerned about security, it could use its right to improve the military presence in Greenland, to build additional bases, renovate old ones that it has abandoned. Now the US tries to punish allies that deploy to Greenland. Actually, it should be glad that Greenland is on the map of other NATO leaders and that they are willing to increase their share. So it's not about security. It is not about developing Greenland. This is basically a kind of Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin style land grab attempt, and we may see how sour it will get.
Yeah, it could get more sour. Again, there are those within the European Union who are steadfast, and we'll get in a moment to those countermeasures. And then there are those that are really trying to keep it all together. On a visit to South Korea, Italy's far-right Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni denouncing the US tariffs. She denounced them while trying to give Trump the benefit of the doubt.
I agree with the attention that the US president attaches, as I have told you many times, to Greenland and in general to the Arctic, which is a strategic area in which excessive interference by actors that may be hostile must clearly be avoided. I think that the willingness of some European countries to send troops to participate in increased security should be read in this sense. Not in the sense of an initiative taken against the United States, but if anything, against other actors.
Okay, Giovanna Di Maio, that little military party that went on those commercial planes, as Peter was describing them, to Greenland last week, was it to send a message to the Russians and the Chinese, or was it to send a message to the Americans?
I think you can send a message to both, because on the one hand, you show President Trump that the European pillar of NATO is building up as the US is asking for a fair burden sharing in the alliance. This, again, is not new. This dates from the Obama administration asking Europeans to spend more on defense. And then you see, obviously, President Trump evolving towards a different posture in which allies are considered more as a liability than an asset. And in NATO, actually in The Hague last summer, the allies committed to increase significantly their defense spending. So I think sending these troops for training in Greenland sends a message to Trump saying we are ready to step up our capabilities and to help the U.S. secure and to put in security Greenland and strategic areas. At the same time, you send a message to Russia and China saying that obviously Europeans are not ignoring this pressure point that they could use to keep on pressuring Europeans, especially from the security aspect, but also later on potentially also from predatory practices that China could put in place.
Is that how you read it, Sandro Gozzi? I mean, originally, when it was announced last week, it was, in the case of France, standing by Denmark. Sandro Gozzi?
Sorry, can you repeat? Because I couldn't hear the studio anymore.
How did you interpret France, for instance, which also sent, a little over 24 military officers last week? Was it to send a message to the Russians and the Chinese, or send a message to the Americans and stand by Denmark?
Two or three, to China, to Russia, and to the United States of America. The Arctic strategy is something which must become very high among our priorities, and also the need, there was a strong need to show solidarity to Denmark, to Greenland, because after all, when a part of our territory is threatened as European Union, we are bound to show solidarity and to cooperate with the part of territory of the member state which is under threat. And this is clearly stated. I mean, there is Article 42, paragraph 7 of the Treaty of the European Union, even stronger than Article 5 of NATO. So it was absolutely necessary for both to show solidarity, and it is necessary also to react to the American attitude. I mean, I remember in this show just before Christmas, I told you that they were not the condition anymore to vote on the EU-US trade deal, the deal of last August in Scotland. And you see, I mean, we are postponing the vote on this EU-US trade deal. Why we are postponing? Because it was promised to us that this deal, which is very unfair to the EU, would have brought stability and predictability in our bilateral relationship. What is happening in Greenland, and this is another reason also for the French initiative, show that we don't have neither predictability nor stability. So you see, we do not have any reason to vote about the trade deal, and this is only another reaction to what is happening in Greenland, and not only in Greenland.
All right, let's talk about that French initiative then. For our viewers, dial back to last July. It was at Donald Trump's golf course in Turnberry, Scotland, that the European Commission president came to sign a deal. It involved a 15% baseline tariff on EU exports to the US. Critics called that agreement that was signed in Scotland as too compliant to the Americans. Now, with the EU convening an emergency summit for Thursday, the French president talking about the anti-coercion instrument. It's a bit of a dry ACI for wonks, also known as the Big Bazooka tool that was originally intended to be used in case of a trade war with China. Now the French president wants it to be used against the United States should Donald Trump go through with those stepped-up tariffs. We're talking about 93 billion euros worth of U.S. imports. What's your calculation, Sandro Gozzi, then? Do the Europeans have the strength to not blink if there are countermeasures, and the countermeasures provoke countermeasures?
Listen, we always say that in Europe we do not have the means for our ambitions. In this case, I will say that so far we haven't got the ambition to use our means. Because when it comes to trade, when it comes to access to our market, which is the most important in the world, and also when it comes to digital legislation, we have all the necessary means and power. We haven't used them so far because we have followed the strategy of appeasement of Donald Trump. This was a major mistake of Ursula von der Leyen, but also of the Italian or the German government, which put the European Commission toward this appeasement strategy. And we see that the appeasement strategy is not working. You know, in Italy there is an old saying which goes, if you behave like a sheep, the wolf will eat you. And we have been behaved like sheep, and Donald Trump has got always more and more appetite. So I think that we do not want a trade war. We want Donald Trump to stop to threaten and bully us. To stop and threaten to bully us, not only on Greenland. Things of digital legislation. Things of what happened to Thierry Breton, who now is persona non grata in the United States of America, only because he was one of the promoters of the digital legislation. And by the way, the United States of America and Donald Trump should ban the whole Commission, starting for Ursula von der Leyen, because as you know, each decision of the European Commission is a collegial decision, and it should ban all of us because the digital legislation that the big tech and Trump hate so much were adopted by more than 90% of the members of the European Parliament. You see, I mean, this situation cannot continue. The appeasement strategy hasn't worked. We have to change strategy. We have to defend ourselves. We have also to use the anti-coercion instrument. But I repeat, not because we want to escalate, but because we want the United States to stop to threaten our interests, and also we want the United States to focus on the real common threat. And the real threat for the United States is not the EU, it's not Greenland, it's not our market. The real threat for the United States and as for us are other foreign actors, and we should join forces for that. But certainly we are ready to defend ourselves. And I think that also the line expressed by Emmanuel Macron is absolutely the right one. And we, as Renew Europe Group, we have just taken similar stances, and we will push the European Parliament to continue along this line.
Peter Doran, do you agree that actually when you're dealing with Donald Trump, it's better to show strength than to flatter?
Well, I think Sandro's list of grievances by the European Union towards the United States is long and an accurate one, but also notice the difference. President Trump is using once more his well and practiced method of escalating to de-escalate. We saw this over the last year in the negotiations over tariffs on goods coming into the United States from the European Union. Clearly, President Trump puts forward the threat of tariffs and pulls them back once there is a negotiated solution. Notice the difference, though. President Trump is couching all of this in a stated national security strategy that accentuates core American interests. Meanwhile, the European Union is meeting on a Sunday to come up ad hoc with their own reactive strategy. I think it is critical to remember the United States is not going to break NATO. We're not going to invade Greenland. And there is a very peaceful, calm, and diplomatic way out. And I believe that is a real estate deal with Denmark. That's what President Trump is saying through his tariff actions.
It's a hard bargain, though. Giovanni Di Maio, do you agree with Peter? At the end of the day, it'll all be settled at the bargaining table?
Well, that's the hope, that this can be solved diplomatically and with reason. At the same time, I do want to echo what Sandro said about the way we should deal with Donald Trump. Yes, the president has this strategy of escalating to de-escalate, but the problem is if on the other side you have appeasement, obviously his tendency would be to get more and more each time. And we've seen like the strategies of Mexico and Canada that stood up to Trump's tariffs, and they actually that actually paid off. Obviously, any deal with President Trump is a line in the sand. It's temporary, but I think that in this regard, the Europeans can have the opportunity to show the importance of the linkages between transatlantic markets, and they can show that Europe can retaliate if its sovereignty is at stake.
All right, so there's that EU summit on Thursday, which will be a stress test, if you will,
Indeed,
of this new resolve. Did we mention Davos, the US president, be showing up in person beforehand at the World Economic Forum on Wednesday? First time in 6 years he'll be speaking. Lots of his European counterparts will also be on hand. Gustav Gressel, I know you can see Switzerland from your window when you're in Vienna. Tell us, what's the, is that where things calm down or blow up?
Well, we'll see. So Davos actually was intended to be a discussion about Ukraine, about the security guarantees, about a possible path towards pressuring Russia to agree to a ceasefire. Now that is out of the window, and Greenland takes all the spotlight. So for Putin, of course, that's a first win. The issue, of course, will be amongst Europeans. How much are they willing to commit kind of resources economically into this fight? The Europeans have some pressure points on the US, that is clear. But of course, they will make close calculations how this early relationship with the US might, in fact, affect their own security. And that will be a tricky discussion. And it's, of course, from a European point of perspective, it is favorable that the next council meeting will be after the Davos summit. But yeah, that's basically the schedule on these things.
And Gustav, I'm asking you because there was the EU's foreign policy chief who took heat over the weekend for stating on X, formerly Twitter, that China and Russia must be having a field day. Those are the words of Kaja Kallas. She's from Estonia, which borders Russia. Again, if you're, it's understandable that if you're European, you're going to be handling Donald Trump with care if you need the United States to prop up Ukraine.
Yeah, that's sort of, these are the two things, the common defense in NATO and nuclear deterrence against Russia, and of course the assistance to Ukraine. And I think the latter is actually now the most urgent one, because the former, to a certain part, already is out of the window. The way Donald Trump had behaved in the whole crisis, and deterrence is not something about physical assets, is about the perception of the other side, whether one state or coalition of states would be willing to use force to stop me or not. And the way that he has behaved, the sort of perception in Moscow that the United States would be willing to use military force to stop a Russian aggression against Europe is doubtful at best. However, of course, the Russian army is bogged down in Ukraine, and for the time being, they can't afford any major military operation against us, even though we are under-equipped for the time being, because they are bogged down in that war.
And do you think, Gustav, do you think that tweet by Kaja Kallas is too weak, as many Europeans were complaining?
Look, diplomatic language is something I barely comment on, but I think it shows the anxiety in which a lot of European countries live. And we have to be clear on defense issues. You can't just pivot away the moment the US becomes basically a non-allied country. For 80 years, almost, European armed forces have been designed to fight alongside the United States. They have been designed to fulfill a certain role within NATO and not to be a force that is independently usable as a military token, especially when it comes to deterring Russia. We have a lot of defense ties. Major countries in NATO use, for example, the Patriot surface-to-air missile, and it's the backbone of their defense. And now, of course, it's produced in the United States. So you need 5 to 7 years to kind of come up with alternative production lines of similar European missiles if you want to do that. So regardless or not, and regardless how you decide, there is a lag time in preparing yourself for that. That is objectively there. You can't do anything about it, and you can't design a diplomatic language that makes that any better place. And we have to deal with that. That's the problem.
Peter Doran, the Europeans are still reeling from that speech 11 months ago by the Vice President of the United States in Munich, where he said the biggest threat to Europe wasn't Russia or China, but assaults, as he put it, on free speech within the European Union and woke culture on the continent. When you see the real-life security issues that Gustav was just mentioning, including nuclear deterrence, do you understand why Europeans are worried?
Well, certainly so. And I think Vice President Vance also got that same sense. That's why 6 months later, in Washington, the same Munich Security Council conference held a sit-down with him, and he walked back many of those comments. But more importantly than that, I think Kaja Kallas's statement is an important one. It's a very bad idea to ever find yourself on the wrong side of her perspective when it comes to geopolitics. Instead of being a weak statement, She picked up a hammer and hit the nail directly on the head. A lot of our discussions about Greenland are distracting from the core challenges that our alliance faces. But here's the important point. I think it's very dangerous to discuss the United States in terms of being a non-ally. If Russia ever puts a single toe inside of NATO, the first country everyone in Europe is going to call is the United States. That underscores our commitment to Europe, and I hope that that perspective continues to sustain itself inside Europe.
Sandro Gozzi, you agree?
But it is clear that the security power is absolutely asymmetrical, and it is used and abused by Donald Trump to push and to put us under pressure. I think that Kaja Kallas stated the obvious. It is clear that China and Russia are cheering up when the US bash and attack and threats their allies in the European Union. But I mean, it is not us who chose to stay on the wrong side. It is Donald Trump and Vance who chose to stay on the wrong side. It's not us who have been attacking and putting under pressure and that threaten trade measure, tariff against the United States of America. It was the United States of America who started to do that. So far, we have been trying to appease the United States of America, and this has not worked. Then there is another elephant in the room in this discussion that you mentioned before. It is the issue of Donald Trump and Vance's relation with the extreme right in Europe, because they did not only they threaten us on trade, but they threaten us on rule of law, on democratic principle, on fundamental values, on protection of our citizens' rights, on digital platform. At the moment, people like Vance hate the European Union because we are the mirror of what the United States of America used to be. A beacon of democracy, a beacon of rule of law, a beacon of fundamental rights, a beacon to protect our minority. They hate us because we are what they have been so far and what Vance and Trump hated so much. But on the other side, their threat to the territorial sovereignty of other countries is putting in a very uncomfortable and awkward position their potential ally of the extreme right. I mean, I feel sorry for Giorgia Meloni, who wanted to build bridges across the Atlantic, and now she sees that her good friend Donald Trump is threatening the sovereignty of our member state. But also the declaration that you mentioned of Alice Weidel, of Jordan Bardella, of Marine Le Pen. Marine Le Pen has been queuing up for hours at the entrance of the Trump Tower in New York a few years ago, hoping to meet Donald Trump, and she has never met Donald Trump. Now, the Rassemblement National, or Alternative für Deutschland, are discovering that Vance and Trump's strategy is a threat to our sovereignty. And you know what is the best way to protect our sovereignty is to build up a European sovereignty, a European power, which would be also in the interest of the United States, because that would mean that we could provide much more and better to our military security. But this is the situation where we are now. And that the Munich speech, I took it very seriously, and many people took it very seriously, and we were right, because what Vance said in Munich, it is very clearly written, I agree, on the national security strategy of the United States of America. So I think that people like Vance or Trump sometimes are not serious, but they should be taken very seriously. And this is why we are discussing about a bolder reaction. Not because we want to ignite the conflict, but because we need to protect our interests and our values.
Giovanni Di Maio, were you surprised to see the leader of Germany's far right and France's far right turn against Trump on this one?
I think the US maybe, or certain MAGA circle can be a bit surprised because their activity, especially also from the Heritage Foundation, the conservative think tank that's built up a report, Project 2025, talking about how a conservative foreign policy, namely Trump's one, should be articulated. They have an outreach to these kind of parties in Europe. But the problem is that these kind of parties are also sovereigntist parties. So many of them are anti-American. So and pro-Russia.
Or just have to listen to their constituents, right? Who
Sure, but the issue is that in the national security strategy, you see the language applied by the Trump administration that shows Europe some tough love, basically saying that we should put our house in order with, especially regarding immigration or certain cultural issues. At the same time, they're targeting as their allies some political parties who are also fundamentally anti-American. So it's not a decent strategy that they are trying to deploy. It's actually something that can backfire to the United States. And this Greenland thing is very logical if you look at the national security strategy of the US that talks about the strategic interests, especially in the Western Hemisphere. But you also see, when read in connection to the attacks that have been done to Europe, that this is not just to make a deal and to have and protect Greenland. This is a predatory action that does not look at Europe as a sovereignty, as an ensemble of sovereign nations, but as a vassal that should just listen, apply, and bail as far as and on coercion, basically bow to coercion that's coming from the United States.
And since we have this sort of rare moment of near consensus inside Europe, is it the end of appeasement?
I think European leaders are very clear-eyed about what Trump's methods are. I think that's the stress test for Europe to stand up and end the appeasement. At the same time, let's not forget we are on the same side. So we should always look for dialogue and strategic convergence. But we need to acknowledge that one thing is the threatening of sovereignty of a country, and another one is trying to make a deal. And I think Donald Trump is very much on the former line, so Europe is required to push back.
Required to push back. We'll see. It's going to be an interesting week. We'll be covering it here on France 24. I want to thank you, Giovanna De Maio, for being with us. I want to thank Sandro Gozzi for joining us from the European Parliament in Strasbourg. Peter Doran in Washington, Gustav Gressel in Vienna. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.